The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1 I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today, Scotland's nurses have spoken. This damning report from the Royal College of Nursing lays bare our broken NHS. First-hand accounts from over 500 Scottish nurses reveal a lack of dignity and privacy for patients stuck in corridors and side rooms. They describe scenes of chaos, patient safety being compromised due to a shortage of beds and a dangerous lack of medication and oxygen. It's page after page of shocking and desperate testimony. One said it's degrading, undignified and at times unsafe for patients who are already angry due to the long waits, sometimes waiting in emergency departments for over 35 hours to go to a ward, just to be put up in the corridor. The system is broken. So does John Swinney agree with Scotland's nurses that Scotland's NHS is broken? First Minister.
The first thing I want to do is to apologise to any individual who has had an unsatisfactory experience in the care that they have received and in the congestion within the hospitals. I want to commend, as I did last week, the staff of the National Health Service for the unremitting commitment that they give to ensure that the system is able to deliver as best as it can in the face of unprecedented demand. And I recounted to Parliament last week the enormity of the increase in flu cases that have been wrestled with within the National Health Service over the course of the last few weeks. The Government is entirely focused on ensuring that we meet the needs of patients and we support staff in undertaking the essential work that they undertake, given the enormous increase in demand that we faced in recent weeks.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you. And while apologies are welcome and commending staff is also welcome, it's change that's required. This report confirms that hospital overcrowding is at dangerous levels, with one nurse saying, "I work in what is supposed to be a 32-bed assessment unit. Recently we've had between 60 to 70 patients at any one time, and we know the root cause of this. It's due to record levels of delayed discharge, which the SNP government promised to eradicate 10 years ago. 10 years ago. But SNP ministers now don't even seem to accept this reality. This morning, the Health Secretary denied that patients were regularly treated in corridors, and in response, Colin Pullman of the RCN disagreed, saying it's now been normalised. So, First Minister, who is right, Scotland's nurses or the SNP Health Secretary?
First Minister.
President, the Health Secretary and I are fully aware of the circumstances that are prevailing in our hospital system just now. The Health Secretary has seen it with his own eyes in the visits that he has undertaken. I saw it when I spent the evening of the 4th of January in the emergency department of Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, where I was observing the enormous commitment of staff in the face of unprecedented demand. And I remind Parliament that the level of flu cases that we have been experiencing and the level of hospital admissions are the highest they have been since records began in 2010, and they are formidably higher than the demand that we faced in the winter of last year. So there is unprecedented demand in the system. I want to commend health service staff for managing through those difficult experiences, and of course the measures that the Government has put in place to tackle delayed discharge, to ensure we have better flow navigation within our hospitals, to make sure we have same-day treatment services available, are all part of the measures the Health Secretary has taken to try to address this situation.
Russell Finlay.
The fact the Health Secretary's seen it with his own eyes and then continues to deny it is absolutely damning. But it illustrates a stark disconnect between what SNP politicians think about the NHS and the reality of what the nurses are actually saying. So here's a reality check. Some nurses are being forced to quit in desperation and disgust. A nurse of 10-year service said, "People are dying as a result of ambulances being held at hospitals." Another said, "It's disgusting and we're on our knees, but nothing seems to be getting done." Another said, "It breaks my heart at the pathetic care that we are able to give." It cannot continue. It's absolutely heartbreaking. So when will this government bring forward a serious plan to fix Scotland's NHS?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I want to assure Parliament that despite the enormous increase in flu cases that we have seen, to the highest level we've ever seen on record, there is now a reduction in those cases prevailing within the National Health Service. I also want to assure patients of the steps the Government has taken to ensure that we have the support in place to address this demand, which comes from, as I said in my earlier answer, the same-day emergency care services, the provision of flow navigation centres, the provision of frailty units in hospitals, the development of the hospital-at-home system, which has significantly enhanced our ability to care for patients and to ensure that individuals are supported in the right context and in the right circumstances. Now, Mr Finlay asked me about reforms. And reforms were undertaken in the redesign of urgent care programme in December 2020. And the independent evaluation of that programme has demonstrated that the patient experience from the redesign of urgent care has resulted in, for many patients, shorter waits as a consequence of the expansion of emergency care that we've put in place.
Members.
And also the expansion of NHS 24 services that we have put in place, which was a key recommendation of the redesign of urgent care. Now, what has helped us in this incredibly difficult period has been the fact that members of the public have followed the advice that the Government has issued, which is to secure the right care in the right place, which means that has reduced the amount of demand that is prevalent in some emergency settings and has enabled us to provide the support that individuals require. That is what we have to do to navigate through the periods where there will be increased demand, and that is one of the periods that we've just experienced.
Russell Finlay.
I really don't know where to begin with that answer. I mean, this covers a period where the flu epidemic that we're facing now is not in action. It's absolutely preposterous. Patients expect and deserve dignity and decency from the NHS, but nurses say they cannot provide the treatment that's needed. And I'd like the First Minister to please just listen to what the nurses are saying. I've read the report and I would encourage him to do so. One describes being disgusted and ashamed that this was the best we could offer a 91-year-old lady. Another describes being embarrassed and ashamed at leaving a 100-year-old woman on a trolley in discomfort. Another said, "We are putting Scottish Government targets before patients and it needs to stop." So what does John Swinney have to say to those nurses who are being let down and to the patients who are having to suffer this disgusting and degrading treatment?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the reason why I cited the flu rates is because that was they were at their peak, putting the greatest burden on emergency care within the National Health Service during the period that the RCN survey was undertaken. So the evidence that I've put to Parliament is directly related to the questions that Mr Finlay is putting to me. Now, I accept and acknowledge the enormity of the pressure on the National Health Service. I have been completely candid with Parliament about that over a number of weeks. And as a consequence, we have been leading a process of supporting our territorial boards, supporting the Scottish Ambulance Service. In the review call last night, which I chaired, there is a significant improvement in the delivery of healthcare in emergency situations as a consequence of the reduction in the flu cases that I have talked about. And I'm grateful to members of the public for their cooperation in trying to ensure that they secure the right care in the right place. And I'm profoundly grateful to staff for working so hard during an incredibly difficult and demanding period. And Mr Finlay asks what the public can expect of the Government. Well, what the public can expect from me is the unrelenting focus of the First Minister, working with the Health Secretary to make sure we deliver the improvements and the developments that will ensure patients get the care they require and to ensure that they are supported in having the care that's necessary to address their health circumstances at all times.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, last week I raised the case of Robert, a retired policeman from Lanarkshire who spent 5.5 hours on the floor in A&E before being given morphine and a bed. The First Minister apologised, but as usual he then used hard-working NHS staff as his political shield. Well, today the Royal College of Nursing has published a damning report that lays bare the impact of the crisis on NHS patients and staff, with one nurse saying, "I deliver care in inappropriate settings every single day, all day. It deprives the patient of privacy and dignity. It forces us to go against our codes and training." This is shameful. Last week, John Swinney apologised to patients. He's just done it again today. But will he now apologise to the NHS staff that he and his SNP government are failing every day?
First Minister.
One of the key points that I've tried to stress in all of my answers to Parliament on this question is the importance of ensuring I address the circumstances that we face in our hospital system as they are. And that's one of the reasons why I went to see the emergency department at the Royal Infirmary on the 4th of January to see with my own eyes the pressure that was being recounted to me by health service leaders over the course of a number of weeks where I was engaged in trying to address this situation. I think we all accept, ministers throughout the United Kingdom, the pressures that are on the National Health Service because of winter circumstances. And I've recounted to Parliament the enormous increase in flu cases. So let me, for the record, put those numbers on the parliamentary record. Hospital admissions nearly doubled from 708 in the week ending the 15th of December to 1,382 in the week ending the 22nd of December, and they increased further to 1,596 in the week ending the 29th of December. Now, that's when the survey was undertaken. So I acknowledge the reality of the pressures, the intense pressures on the National Health Service. We have expanded staff numbers. We've expanded consultant numbers. We've expanded the capacity of NHS 24 as a review of urgent care called on us to do back in 2020, and we have done that. And the government will still continue to take all of the steps necessary to make sure that our staff are as well supported as they can be in dealing with the intense pressures that prevail in winter time within the National Health Service.
Sarwar.
John Swinney wants to pretend that we just have a winter crisis in the NHS. The reality is we have a permanent crisis in the NHS on John Swinney's watch. And the RCN report details the human cost of John Swinney and Neil Gray's incompetence. Nurses are delivering care in overcrowded or unsuitable places like corridors, cupboards and even car parks on a daily basis. Staff are caring for multiple patients in a single corridor, unable to access oxygen, cardiac monitors and other life-saving equipment. Patients are going into cardiac arrest while in a corridor. Incontinent patients are left with no privacy, and almost 90% of nurses say patient safety is being compromised. Nurses describe flu patients waiting in corridors next to vulnerable patients or having to discuss their miscarriage with a couple in an overcrowded corridor. One nurse said, "I worked throughout COVID-19, and although that was a horrendous experience, this lack of care in the broken system is worse." Isn't this the deadly reality of the NHS on John Swinney and the SNP's watch?
First Minister.
No, it's not. What we are doing is we are focusing within the resources available to us on maximising the effectiveness of patient care for individuals. So what has the government done in recent years? Well, the government has, for example, increased NHS staffing by 26.6% in the period in which we have been in office. So in Mr Sarwar's central point to me in his last question, the government has increased staffing numbers. We've increased consultant numbers, particularly in emergency care. We've also increased the capacity of NHS 24. We've introduced innovations such as Hospital at Home to ensure that more patients are treated in the circumstances that best meet their circumstances. So the government will continue to innovate and reform to address the needs of the public. But there is a harsh reality about the increased demand that we are facing as a consequence of the upsurge in flu cases, the implications of COVID, which has left the population facing more acute health circumstances than pre-COVID. And obviously the government is prioritising the National Health Service by ensuring that we're investing the largest sum of money ever in the National Health Service. And I look forward to the government's budget passing to enable us to secure that investment for the people of this country.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, the RCN in Scotland this morning said, and I quote, "This is a wake-up call for the Scottish Government." But clearly from John Swinney's answers, he's asleep at the wheel. And that's why we need a change of direction in this country. But let's listen. He denies reality. So will he listen to what Scottish nurses are saying? One said, "It is demoralising, frustrating and embarrassing. It feels like patients are a number, not a patient." Another Scottish nurse, "It's degrading and unsafe, and these locations are not designed or intended for patient care and offer little or no privacy." Another Scottish nurse, "I've had to give IV antibiotics on a chair beside the nurses' station to someone septic." Another Scottish nurse, "I'm now in the process of leaving the NHS. It is fraying at the seams and has left me with mental health problems and trauma." This is the damning and sad reality of our NHS under the SNP, and isn't a clear sign that John Swinney and this SNP government can't fix the mess they made, and we need a new direction in our country.
First Minister.
I hear this slogan from Anna Sarwar every week, but I just want to point out to Parliament there wasn't a single word of substance to back up the rhetoric of new direction from Anna Sarwar. And the last word that Anna Sarwar used was change. Yes. Change. He argued that a Labour government in London would change the circumstances for people in this country. Well,
members, let's hear one another.
A Labour government didn't change the circumstances for waspy women in this country who've been betrayed by the Labour Party in the United Kingdom. Now, the Secretary of State for Scotland was in Parliament yesterday and was telling us all that the people couldn't cope with the honesty of the Labour government. Well, I think on the basis of the last few months, what people in Scotland are waking up to is the fundamental dishonesty of the Labour Party, and Mr Sarwar epitomises it.
Question number 3, Lorna Slater. Question number 3. Let's hear Lorna Slater.
2024 was the hottest year on record. We are seeing the climate break down in front of our eyes in devastating floods and raging wildfires. This is just the start, now that planet Earth has crossed the threshold of 1.5 degrees of global heating. The promises made in the Paris Agreement have proven worthless. Global leaders have failed to protect our planet. Is Scotland's First Minister prepared to take serious action on land use change, on reducing traffic by introducing road charges and cutting the cost of public transport, and by making homes warmer, greener and cheaper to heat, so that we can get back on track to meet our climate targets?
First Minister.
I'm certainly committed to ensuring that we take action on the climate. I want to make sure that we fulfil our obligations that Parliament has put into statute, and to make sure that we take the practical actions to make sure that can be the case. Now, the Government, of course, has a number of policy measures in place which will assist us in that work. Parliament understands and knows what they are. Some of them involve investment, which is tied up with the Government's budget, which involves £300 million, for example, for the Heat and Buildings programme, and additional investment of nearly £200 million in a range of active and sustainable transport measures. So the Government is committed to the policy agenda of taking action on climate, in addition to the steps that we're taking on renewable energy, and we're also taking the practical financial steps to make sure that programme is in place to support those policy interventions.
Lorna Slater.
First Minister, we have a duty to future generations not to let global heating spiral out of control. Existing oil and gas production must wind down as we transition to renewable energy, and new oil and gas exploration is not compatible with Scotland's climate commitments. The last time the First Minister was asked about Scotland's energy strategy, he said that the reason for further delay was recent court decisions blocking oil and gas projects on environmental grounds. But that can only worry him if he is intending to support new oil and gas projects in Scotland. So, will the First Minister confirm today the presumption against new oil and gas in Scotland?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, what the Government has an obligation to do is to make sure that all of our policy interventions are well evidenced and take into account all of the circumstances that we face. Now, the court cases that I've cited before are relevant because they fundamentally affect decision-making and policy approaches in relation to consenting of any oil and gas developments. And it's important the Government takes time to understand all of those issues and engage with the United Kingdom Government, who on these questions are the decision-making body. Now, what I will say to Parliament today is the Government is absolutely committed to our agenda on climate action. We have binding statutory targets. I want Scotland to achieve those targets because I want us to play our part in protecting the planet. I accept fundamentally the point that Laura Slater puts to me, that these issues are in jeopardy because of the temperature of the planet last year. I want to make sure Scotland plays our part in addressing that circumstance.
Question number 4, Jackie Dunbar.
To ask the First Minister what assessment the Scottish Government has made of the potential economic impact of Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners' reported £800 million investment in battery energy storage sites in Scotland.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I welcome investment in the construction of the 2 largest battery storage systems in Europe in South Lanarkshire and in Fife. The construction and long-term maintenance of these projects will bring jobs and economic value locally and to wider Scotland. Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners have stated there will be 150 staff working at Colburn 1 during peak construction. This investment and show of confidence in Scotland will also contribute indirectly to local employment. This is a landmark announcement for our economic and our net zero prospects.
Jackie Dunbar.
Given recent reports of energy storage insecurity, the Colburn battery development will be a vital addition to our national energy security mix, as well as a welcome investment in the growth of Scotland's energy transition infrastructure. It's also essential that the local community benefits from this significant investment. It's just unfortunate that the Labour UK Government have failed to keep their promise to bring bills down. Can the First Minister say any more about how the development will boost the region, such as through job creation, including in the renewables supply chain?
First Minister.
So this is a very significant investment, and I think it demonstrates Scotland's openness to attract international investment as part of our journey to net zero. The battery storage facilities will create local employment. They will also be integral to delivering a sustainable power network for Scotland and enable us to be able to withstand some of the changes in demand within the power network. When fully functional, the 2 sites will provide an incredible 1.5 gigawatts of power, which is sufficient to cover the energy needs of more than 4.5 million households for a 2-hour period, which demonstrates the scale and the capacity of the investment being made in Scotland as a result of the Government's policy approach.
Simpson.
Thank you. I welcome the investment at Colburn in South Lanarkshire, but in light of the announcement yesterday by NESO of a pause on the applications process for new entrants to the connections queue, and that's because there are far more than there is demand. Does the First Minister agree with me that there should be a national strategy for energy storage in Scotland that matches approval by the Scottish Government's Energy Consents Unit for battery storage sites with actual demand and where there is community buy-in?
First Minister.
There's some interesting points raised by Mr Simpson, but we've also got to be mindful of the economic opportunities that arise out of energy production. Energy production is going to be a significant economic asset for Scotland in the years to come, just in the same way as energy production has been a significant economic asset for Scotland up until now. The difference looking forward is I want to make sure Scotland benefits from that energy strategy and from that energy policy, because we didn't benefit from the last energy opportunity that we had in Scotland. I want to make sure we benefit from the next one.
Absolutely. Question number 5, Edward Mountain.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister, in light of the number of people under 50 being diagnosed with bowel cancer, what proposals the Scottish Government has to extend the national screening programme to those under 50 years old.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I thank Edward Mountain for raising this important issue and also for the commendable commitment and leadership that he's given on this question within Parliament and outside of Parliament. The Scottish Government, along with the rest of the United Kingdom, follows advice about screening programmes from the UK National Screening Committee, an independent expert advisory group. Scotland has fully adopted the UK National Screening Committee's recommendation to invite everyone aged between 50 to 74 for bowel screening every 2 years. This recommendation was based on a thorough assessment of the risks and benefits of screening people at different ages. I can assure Parliament that if the National Screening Committee recommended a lower age range, we would explore as a matter of urgency how that could be taken forward in Scotland. Edward Mountain.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I thank the First Minister for that answer. And I'd like to put on record that I'm very proud in Scotland that our NHS and this government has led the way in bowel screening since 2017. I'm personally very grateful. But it is also clear with the increasing number of young people getting bowel cancer, we need to do more work. And one of the most cost-effective ways, not necessarily by increasing screening, is by making sure that GPs are aware of the problem and refer people at the first possible option that they may have bowel cancer for further tests. So I probably agree with him on that. Where I disagree and where bowel cancer disagree, and what I've been pushing on, First Minister, is greater sensitivity in our screening programme. Now, I've been told there's a lack of capacity in colonoscopies to allow that to happen. But the result of that is it ignores the real costs of bowel cancer, which could include radiotherapy, chemotherapy and surgery, all of which have a huge cost. So will the government commit to carrying out a cost-benefit analysis of increasing the sensitivity of bowel screening in line with the National Bowel Screening Committee's recommendation to ensure that Scotland continues to lead the way in bowel cancer screening as we should?
First Minister.
First of all, let me thank Mr Mountain for his commendation of the steps the Government is taking on bowel screening. I think the bowel screening programme is an excellent programme. I think it is so convenient for members of the public and it's so efficient. So I think and it's also so important for the management of individuals' health. So I'm really grateful for his comments in that respect. On the other points about the programme, I'll consider all of the points that Mr Mountain has put to me. I'll ask the Health Secretary to advise me on these questions. I think it's important that we take all practical steps within the clinical advice available to us to act accordingly. And I think Mr Mountain and I are probably in the same place on respecting the clinical advice that is available to us. But if there are specific mechanisms that we can deploy which will make a difference in this respect, I'll certainly be very happy to consider them.
David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is welcome that Scotland fully adopted the UK's National Screening Committee's recommendation to screen all individuals between the ages of 50 and 74 a number of years ago, ahead of parts of the UK. Can the First Minister advise how the Scottish Government will continue to invest in screening services alongside endoscopy and urology services to support patients across Scotland?
First Minister.
So this is principally taken forward through our endoscopy and urology diagnostic recovery and renewal plan, which is supported by £70 million worth of investment, and it's focused on bolstering endoscopy capacity through the recruitment of additional endoscopists, and we've established a network of hubs to support us in that rapid access to diagnostic services. So the points that Mr Torrance raises are important in enhancing the effectiveness of the services that we have available to us.
Vicky Bailey.
Presiding Officer, this is Less Survivable Cancers Awareness Week. 61% 50% of people in Scotland diagnosed with a less survivable cancer will die from their disease within 1 year. That's lung, liver, brain, esophagus, pancreatic and stomach cancers. In common with bowel cancer, early diagnosis and treatment is key to improving survival rates. Whilst the cancer strategy is welcome, we need faster action to save lives. So what more will the First Minister do to improve early diagnosis for these cancers and drive better outcomes for patients?
First Minister.
This is an important issue that Jackie Baillie raises with me, and let me reassure her that the Government is absolutely committed to this endeavour. We're treating more patients with cancer on time within both standards, the 31 and the 62-day standards, than we did 10 years ago, 12% more in the 31-day standard and 6% more in the 62-day standard, and the median wait for treatment in the 31-day standard is just 4 days. So the point about rapidity is absolutely a point well made, and one the Government is working hard to deliver against. Principally, the answer I'd give to Jackie Baillie is our focus is on developing the rapid cancer diagnostic services, which are critical to make sure there is the earliest possible action and intervention to address the circumstances that Jackie Baillie puts to me, and that will remain the focus of the Government's intervention in this area of policy.
Question number 6, Claire Baker.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government is responding to reports that 182 sexual assaults, including rapes, have taken place in hospitals in the last 5 years.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, assaults on patients or staff are absolutely abhorrent and cannot be tolerated. Everyone has the right to access healthcare or their place of work without the fear of verbal or physical abuse. All instances of violent behaviour, including sexual assaults, are against the law and should be immediately reported to the police and dealt with by the justice system appropriately. The NHS Scotland Charter for Patient Rights and Responsibilities makes clear to patients that they may face legal action if they are abusive, violent or aggressive towards NHS staff or members of the public when using NHS services. The NHS Scotland Bullying and Harassment Workforce Policy provides a means to address unresolved, significant or persistent sexual harassment and misconduct.
Baker.
Thank you. Presiding Officer, these figures are shocking. Hospital patients are often vulnerable and exposed, and they and their families have to be confident that they are safe. As the First Minister says, the perpetrators of sexual assault and rape must be held to account. But there are serious questions about how the NHS responds to these crimes and the safeguarding procedures they have to prevent the opportunity for sexual assaults and rape. And the report this morning from the RCN about having to treat patients in corridors is not only a symptom of an overstretched NHS, it also leaves people in very vulnerable situations. Can I ask how the Scottish Government ensures that robust safeguarding is in place, that sexual assaults in hospitals are taken seriously by the NHS and that patients will be safe when they are in hospital?
Minister.
On the point of whether these issues are taken seriously, I hope what I've said already gives Claire Baker the reassurance that in all circumstances, in all aspects of our public services, any question of sexual assault or any form of sexual misconduct must be addressed by the public authority. They have a statutory and legal obligation to do that, and I would expect them to do that, and we will reinforce that message in the light of the point that Claire Baker puts to me. The second point I would say is that we obviously have to make sure that as part of the whole approach to the patient safety programme, that patients are safe at all times when they are in the care of the National Health Service. That includes making sure that there is appropriate safeguarding in place in all circumstances, and that's the duty of all health boards to make sure that is the case, and we will remind them of that obligation.
Ms White.
First Minister, in the last 5 years, 7 sexual assaults and 2 rapes took place at Carsview Psychiatric Unit in Dundee. With underreporting, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I've heard horrendous accounts of how frightening it is to be a female patient at Carsview. These wards are often terrifying for patients who are at the most vulnerable, especially as they're mixed sex. And that's not just me saying it, it's the Strang report. Will the First Minister instruct his government to stop mixed-sex wards in NHS hospitals and secure psychiatric settings, starting off with Carsview?
First Minister.
As Testwhite will know, there is work underway to strengthen the approach to patient care at Carsview. That is work that, as she has cited, was identified and taken forward by David Strang in his report and has been pursued by NHS Tayside and is being assessed regularly to assess its effectiveness. In relation to the question of single-sex wards, the NHS estate has to be managed carefully to make sure that there is appropriate safety in place at all times for individuals, and that principle should be applied to the care of patients at Carsview and in any other hospital setting.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries. I call Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, the Scottish National Investment Bank announced a very welcome £20 million investment into XLCC, the company developing the UK's first high-voltage direct current cable manufacturing facility at Hunterston in my constituency. This £1.4 billion plus project will create 900 highly skilled jobs and position Scotland as a global leader in HVDC technology. Does the First Minister agree this is a first-class opportunity for Scotland to help drive net zero innovation? And what will his government do to ensure this project and similar secure the support needed to thrive?
First Minister.
Sir, I very much welcome the announcement that's been made by XLCC in relation to the facility at Hunterston. This is an example of exactly what we envisaged with the Scottish National Investment Bank, that it would provide the opportunity for investment through that mechanism to support private sector investment and to leverage in much more significant volumes of private sector investment into the Scottish economy. So the funding model is working, and obviously this helps us in taking forward our net zero ambition. So I'm delighted that Mr Gibson's constituency has benefited in the way that he's recounted to Parliament, and it's important from the government's point of view that the Scottish National Investment Bank is actively engaged in supporting investments as part of our transition to net zero.
Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, I've been contacted this week by a constituent in Prestwick. He attended his GP on the 30th of December with a lesion in his back suspected to be skin cancer. His GP made an urgent referral to dermatology. Having twice been diagnosed with skin cancer, he knows this is something which demands urgent attention. Despite this, he was told it would be, and I quote, over 12 months before he could be seen at hospital, despite the referral being marked urgent. For someone with suspected cancer, 12 months could be the difference between life and death. Does the First Minister think this is an acceptable timescale, and what action will the Scottish Government take to ensure urgent cancer referrals like this one are seen within appropriate and safe timeframes?
First Minister.
President, if a clinician believes that a case is urgent, then that priority should be reflected within the National Health Service. Now, I don't know the details of the case that Sharon Dowie puts to me today. If she would care to provide us with the details, we will investigate the issues that she raises. But as I said in my answer to Jackie Bailey, urgent intervention on cancer-related cases is absolutely critical to ensure that individuals have the best outcomes possible. So if Sharon Dowie would care to provide me with the details, I will have those looked into today.
Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week, I hosted a members' debate on diabetes technology, where I highlighted that SIGN Guideline 170, which gives people with type 1 diabetes a choice in technology to manage their condition, is not being fully followed in all health boards. In her speech, the Minister for Public Health stated that children are being given choice, but failed to mention adults. Does the First Minister agree health guidelines should be followed, including for adults with type 1 diabetes?
First Minister.
These guidelines are there for a purpose, and that's to provide advice to clinicians and assurance to patients about the way in which individuals should be treated. There will, of course, be challenges in the delivery of these services within the resources that we have available to us, but the SIGN guidelines are there for a purpose, and I would encourage health boards to follow those in all circumstances.
Colette Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, the Secretary of State for Scotland, Ian Murray, claimed the SNP government had not yet asked for DWP data to end the two-child cap. However, the Social Justice Secretary wrote to the DWP and the Scottish Secretaries on this issue last month. Can the First Minister offer the Secretary of State any advice on how to keep up with his inbox and support tackling child poverty in Scotland?
On matters for which the First Minister has general responsibility.
Well, I think it's important, Presiding Officer, that there is accurate information given to the public about the measures being taken forward on the Government's policy agenda. And on the 16th of December, the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice wrote to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, copied to the Secretary of State for Scotland, requesting data sharing requirements or specifying data sharing requirements, including data for all children attached to the universal credit claim, including date of birth, data for which children on the universal credit claim are included in the universal credit payment, data for all children who are paid under the universal credit exemption rules, including the exemption reason, central payment system benefit codes, all data already shared by the DWP for the purposes of administering the Scottish Child Payment, but expanded to include children up to the age of 19 years of age, and data on the universal credit payment cycles for the claims. Now, I was assured, face to face, by the Prime Minister that the DWP would work collaboratively with us on taking forward this policy. It is not helpful, and it's not representative for the Secretary of State for Scotland to make the comments that he made yesterday. So if we are going to have this improved climate of relations between the Scottish and the United Kingdom Government, the UK Government better keep its side of the bargain.
I call Ros McCall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sure the First Minister is aware of the surprise announcement by Lloyds Banking Group concerning the closure of its base in Dunfermline in 2026, which currently employs 1,500 people. Whilst I'm relieved to hear that the intention of this, that there will be limited job losses with workers either relocating to Edinburgh or working remotely, however, the impact on the local community has been vast and the potential extra cost for staff remains deeply concerning. So my question is, what engagement has the Scottish Government had with Lloyds Banking Group on this surprise decision? And will the First Minister work to ensure that any impact of this move will be minimal for employees and people living in the area? Thank you. First Minister.
These are obviously matters for Lloyds Banking Group to determine, but the Government engages actively with Lloyds Banking Group, and indeed I suspect these issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Financial Services Advisory Board, which is co-chaired by the Scottish Government. And we certainly will do all that we can to ensure that there is no loss of employment and that individuals who are affected are not inconvenienced as a consequence of the decision taken by Lloyds Banking Group.
Angus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, 30 million UK homes are heated by gas, and half of our needs are now imported. The less we produce here, the more we rely, increasingly on the USA, of fracked gas. Does the First Minister agree with me, and like Norway, and as Russell Borthwick of Aberdeen Chamber urges, that we must resume exploration of oil and gas? Otherwise, we're only providing a further boost to the fracking industry so beloved of the President-elect, Donald Trump.
First Minister.
President Officer, it's important that we undertake the transition to net zero that we have got to undertake as a society, because from all the evidence, and we've discussed it already in Parliament, there will be catastrophic circumstances if we do not address the use of fossil fuels within our economy. Now, the Government has a managed approach to that policy objective. It is about making sure we have a just transition. It's about investing in our renewable energy technology. And as a consequence, I'm confident that Scotland will have the energy generation capacity that we need to meet the challenges of future days. So what we've got to do is to work with the industry on a just transition strategy, and that's what the Government is doing.
Finlay Carson.
Presiding Officer, my constituency of Galloway and West Dumfries was one of the areas most severely hit in the 2001 foot and mouth outbreak. My brother and I were directly affected, with our farm only a stone's throw away from one of the first farms affected in Scotland, coming under movement restrictions for months. The economic cost was not the only long-term legacy, with emotional scars still deeply felt across the rural communities I represent. I vividly remember the heart-wrenching calls to friends and neighbours who had received the news that their beloved stock had to be destroyed. For weeks on end, the acrid smoke from the pyres that evaded houses and touched every life, whether directly connected to our farming community or not. Will the First Minister set out what discussions the Scottish Government has had with their UK counterparts and with the NFUS to ensure everything is done to prevent the disease once again reaping havoc here in Scotland? I would particularly draw attention to the concerns that the Republic of Ireland could become the back door through which the disease could return via our ports in Cairnryan.
First Minister.
President, so there is active discussions underway on a constant basis between the Scottish and United Kingdom governments on these questions. Obviously, there is a case in relation to that's emerged in of foot and mouth disease in Germany, so the issue is live and topical. The Scottish Government will take all necessary steps to make sure that we are properly engaged in this process and that we'll engage stakeholders to ensure that the terrible circumstances that Mr Carson reminds us of that took place about 24 years ago are not repeated, and the Chief Veterinary Officer of the Scottish Government is actively involved in these issues as our ministers.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Rhoda Grant, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the public gallery to do so.